The molecular edge came out through his back like a blade of quiet blue light, and he did not fall. Thesivari of the fourth dissension had grown up on the certain physics of Vikara combat. A blade of that class ended the argument. Even her uncles, whose carapace was the color of old bronze and who had walked the Kellan trenches for 2 full rotations, had gone down when a molecular edge tasted their marrow. This human, bruised 40 pounds lighter than the sketh he had just walked into, a suit ruined at the shoulder, should have knelt. He should have coughed once and understood that the door of the world had closed behind him. Instead, he looked at her. She would never come back from the puzzle that opened in her chest at that moment. It was the sort of puzzle that keeps opening for the rest of a life. 6 months later, when the Compact asked her to stand before their historians, she would begin her voluntary deposition by describing the look on the human's face when the blue edge came out through him. Not the face of a man in pain, not the face of a man understanding his own death. The face of a man performing an inventory. The air in the Houston diplomatic annex 8 days earlier had tasted of copper wire, burned ozone, and vaporized cooking oil from the food court kitchens 2 floors down. Pete Donovan got the assignment because he did not say no in time. Meridian's security contractors had offered the Vikara diplomatic posting to 6 people before it reached his inbox, and 5 of them had declined before finishing the first paragraph of the brief. The 6th, a former Australian commando named Hollis, had accepted on a Tuesday, arrived at the annex on the Wednesday, spent 40 minutes in an orientation elevator with the dignitary, and been on a plane home by Thursday morning. Meridian's Houston office had gone through most of their short list. Pete's file was near the bottom because he was on probationary status after a Jakarta escalation the year before, where he had cracked 2 of his ribs and brought 4 hostages out of a warehouse alive. His handler at Meridian, a woman named Diane Vasquez, called him on a Sunday afternoon in late September with a tone in her voice that Pete recognized from the Corps. It was the tone of somebody who is already tired of the conversation she's about to have. 3 weeks, Pete. Escort duty, light calendar, downtown Houston. Who's the principal? Diane paused a beat too long. That was information all by itself. Vikara diplomatic, she said. 3rd air, signing something with the Compact on the 10th. There are notes on the file. What kind of notes? Behavioral notes, Pete. The last guy walked. He looked at the ceiling of his 1-bedroom apartment in the Heights and thought about the rent. He thought about the fact that his little brother, back in Duluth, was 2 payments behind on the loader for the sawmill, and Gail was covering it, and Gail should not have to be covering it. He thought about the fact that he had turned 37 in July, and he still had a landlord. How much? He said. Diane told him. When do I fly? You don't fly, Pete. It's Houston. You drive tomorrow. 6:30. He hung up. He sat on the edge of his bed for a while. Then he called his sister Gail in Duluth because he had told himself 4 years ago that if he ever took another job he did not fully understand, he would call her first so that a person on this planet knew what county to look in. You okay, Peter? I'm okay, Gail. That is not the voice of a man who is okay. It's a 3-week job in Houston. She was quiet. Gail Donovan, 42 years old, ran a walk-in clinic on East Superior Street and could hear a tumor in a stranger's cough from across a parking lot. She could hear whatever was in her brother's silence, too. Is it a nice one, Peter? It's a job. Come home for Thanksgiving. I'll try. Peter, come home. I said I'll try, Gail. They hung up. He packed a duffel. He put his father's K-bar knife on his belt under his jacket, where it had lived for 11 years. He drove to Houston in the morning through a thin autumn rain that came off the Gulf and smelled, faintly, of iron. The Vikara delegation had taken the 9th and 10th floors of the annex on Bel Air, an old federal building the State Department had refit for exactly this class of visit. The elevators were slow, the carpets were the color of wet concrete. On the 9th floor, the light in the corridor had been recalibrated to the Vicara spectrum, which was a twin sun yellow that made every human on the floor look like something you had left in a drawer. Thesivari of the 4th Descension was 2 meters and 40 centimeters of gold carapace plating from shoulder to jaw, amber eyes that hunted by thermal signature, a robe of graphite fiber woven with something that shifted color when she breathed. Her true name was a cascade of ultrasonic clicks over a subsonic pulse. The translator collar at her throat compressed it with what Pete thought was audible impatience into one flat syllable. Thes. She stood in the ante-room with her chief attaché, a slim Vicara named Kaelrin Votek, who had the look of a man who had been holding his patience together with adhesive for 20 years and expected to have to hold it together for 20 more. "This," said Kaelrin in standard, gesturing to Pete with the polite economy of somebody presenting a piece of office furniture, "is the Human Security Officer, Compact Article 14 compliant." Tess looked at Pete. She did not blink. Vicara did not blink, not the way humans blinked. They had a slow, inner nictitating veil that closed twice a minute and looked to a human like the shutter of an old camera. She let it close once. She let it open. "He is small," she said. "Ma'am," said Pete. "He is soft." "Ma'am." "He is unarmed." Pete did not correct her. He did not touch the coat under which the K-bar rode. He did not touch the shoulder rig under which the compact Beretta rode. He simply held her gaze and let her finish her list. She had, he understood by the 4th item, been through this before. The State Department liaison arrived 4 minutes later. His name was Brendan Lowe, a career man in his late 40s, a suit that fit him too well, and a way of standing with his weight on his back foot that Pete had learned to recognize in Kandahar as the posture of a man who is calculating something he has decided not to say out loud. He was polite. He was precise. He handed Pete a folder in a paper envelope. He said, with a smile that came pre-installed, "She is a challenging principal. We appreciate the flexibility. Just tell me the rotation," said Pete. "The rotation," said Brendan Lowe, "is you." That was not the rotation Pete had been briefed on. He filed the information and did not react to it. Lowe watched his face for the reaction Lowe had been expecting, did not find it, and moved on cleanly. Pete filed that too. She spat on him on the 2nd day in the elevator between the 5th floor and the 9th floor, with the cameras off at her staff's request. Her saliva ran mildly acidic. It had been calibrated over millennia of Vicara social evolution for species that possess the structural retreat threshold her kind used to manage combat. It was not intended to injure. It was intended to signal. She watched him wipe it off his cheek with the sleeve of his coat. She watched him not flinch. She watched him keep his eyes on the elevator's blind arc for the remainder of the ride. He did not speak. She would describe this in the deposition as the moment when she had first begun to run out of framework. "You did not react," she said, on the 9th floor as the doors opened. "No, ma'am." "Why?" He looked at her. He was still 40 inches shorter than she was. He looked at her the way a farmer looks at a cloud he cannot influence. "Ma'am," he said, "you can spit on me all week. I'm still standing here at 0700 tomorrow. That's what you're paying for." She looked at him. The nictitating veil closed once. She stepped into the corridor and left him behind. The next morning, when he arrived at 0658, she was already in the anteroom. She did not comment on his punctuality. She did not comment on anything for 3 full days. She watched him. That was the shape of the 3rd day and the 4th day and the 5th. She watched him. She watched him check corners. She watched him position himself between her and the doors, always, without appearing to think about it. She watched him refuse to sit when she offered him a chair in the small conference room where she took her afternoon meetings with the compact trade delegate. She watched him eat when he ate, standing at the counter in the annex kitchen, and she watched him drink from a paper cup, a synthesized coffee compound that the Vicara service kept stocked for visiting terrestrial staff. She watched him grimace at it. She watched him drink it anyway. She watched him on the fourth evening throw the cup away with a small, precise motion and murmur, mostly to himself, "That is not coffee." On the fifth day, at a reception on the roof of the annex, a Qatari attaché from the trade office spilled a glass of oxide wine down the front of Thes's robe and laughed. He was a small, brightly plumaged creature with a shrill translated voice and an old habit of being unpleasant to Vicara aristocracy in ways he could deny later. Thes did not move. She had been trained from the age of 11 Vicara years not to move in situations of that kind. She had been trained to signal an aide, who would signal her attaché, who would speak quietly in the Qatari's ear. Pete had been standing 4 meters behind her. He walked forward at a normal pace. He picked up a folded linen napkin from a passing tray. He handed it to Thes without looking at her. He then turned to the Qatari attaché and said very quietly, in standard, "You are going to apologize to Her Grace right now, and then you are going to leave this roof, and then you are going to write her a note, and then you are going to not come back to this building for the rest of her posting. Nod once, if you understood me." The Qatari attaché looked at him. The attaché had been on Earth for 6 months. He had been on Vicara for 2 years before that. He had never been talked to like that by a member of the security personnel of any species. He tried to work out where the offense was. He did not find one. There had been no threat. There had been no raised voice. There had been a small, tired man in a badly fitting suit standing very close to him, and there had been the particular way that man had held his hands at his sides, and there had been something in his eyes that the Qatari's translator collar had not made a sound about. And yet the Qatari knew, with the certainty of a much older instinct than any of them liked to admit, that if he did not nod once, he would not be leaving this roof on his own legs. He nodded once. He apologized to Thes in Qatari and in standard. He left the roof. Thes said nothing. That night, in the corridor outside her suite, she stopped, half a pace ahead of Pete, and did not turn around. "How did you do that?" she said. "Do what, Mom?" "You did not raise your voice. You did not touch him. You did not brandish a weapon." He nodded like a chastised child. Pete considered this. He was tired. It was late. His feet hurt. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a thing you learn overseas. If a man is looking to see what he can get away with, you take the getting away with off the table. Then he leaves. You are trained in this." "Yes, ma'am." "In what?" "In a lot of things, ma'am." She turned finally and looked at him. The corridor light was still calibrated for Vicara's son. He looked again like something you had left in a drawer. "What is your name?" she said. "Pete Donovan, ma'am. It's on the badge." "I do not read your badges." "No, ma'am, that's a fair point." She went into her suite. She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it for a long time. Then she went to her secure terminal and she opened the file that Brendan Lowe's office had sent her on the 3rd day, which she had not yet looked at because she had not yet been curious enough. She looked at it now. She was still looking at it 3 hours later when the corridor buzzer sounded and Kaelrin Votek, her chief attaché, came in with his own copy of the file open on a slate and a small, worried compression around his eyes. "You are reading the Humans dossier," said Kaelrin. "I am reading the Humans dossier. There are inconsistencies. There are inconsistencies." "His previous unit," said Kaelrin, "is listed as combat lost in a mountain engagement 11 Earth years ago. There is a memorial service on record. There are graves, Thesivari. There is a plaque with the names on a wall in Virginia. Yes. His name is on it. Yes. He is standing in your corridor right now. Yes. Kaelrin lowered the slate and looked at her. He had known her since she was 7, Vakara years old. He was one of maybe 3 living beings in the galaxy who could look at her the way he was looking at her now. "What is he?" said Kaelrin. "I do not know," said Tess. "Read the medical section." She read the medical section. She read it twice. She read it a 3rd time. "This cannot be correct," she said. "The bone density profile is 30% above human baseline." "It is correct." "Nobody survives a 9mm kinetic round through the femoral region and runs 6 urban blocks." "He did. He was 24. He was 24. "There is a note here," said Tess, and here her voice did something that she would, later in her deposition, describe as the sound of the last sensible framework being folded up and put in a drawer. Under psychological assessment, the note reads, "Anomalous threshold suppression, pain and threat response. Kaelrin, what does that mean?" Kaelrin looked at his own slate. He read the note. He did not read it aloud. He looked at Tess. "It means," said Kaelrin, "that his response to pain and to danger falls outside the human population curve by an amount their own physicians did not have language for. It means that his species has thresholds at which the body decides the fight is over. His threshold is somewhere they have not measured. It means, Thesivari, that if the fight requires him to remain upright, he will remain upright. Until he cannot. Until he cannot. Yes. When does the cannot come? His file does not tell us that. I do not believe the humans who wrote his file know." She sat with this. The corridor light glowed twin sun yellow behind the panel of her window. Somewhere on the 9th floor, a maintenance drone hummed along a wall. In her mind, in the closed elevator of 4 days ago, a small, tired man wiped her saliva off his cheek with the sleeve of a coat that did not fit him and kept his eyes on the blind arc of the doors. "Kaelrin," she said. "Yes, Thesivari. I have made an error. Yes, Thesivari. I will not make it again. No, Thesivari." He left her office. She did not sleep. She read the dossier all the way through once more from the beginning. Then she read the classified addendum that Meridian Security had not intended to share and that Brendan Lowe's office had provided anyway, without comment, buried at the back. That was the section where she found the 18-month Deep Space Acclimation Program at 1.4 standard gravity and the bone density protocols and the impact tolerance regimes and the phrase in a corner of an old Marine Corps memorandum. Personnel flagged for extrasolar close quarters engagement. Category 2 candidates. Category 2. She had never heard the term. She would not know until much later that there had been only 96 Category 2s in the history of the program. She would not know that only 41 had completed all 3 phases. She would not know that Pete Donovan's core file listed him as having completed all 3 phases, 3 months ahead of his cohort, and having, at the end of it, cleaned out his locker and driven north to Duluth for a week to sit at his father's grave. But she began, at 4 in the morning on the 6th day of his posting, to understand that there was more information in the world than she had allowed herself to look at. The first attempt on her life came on the 6th day at 9:15 in the morning at the Compact Trade Office on Rusk Street, in the form of a cratery courier with a package addressed to the Vakara sovereignty and a small, cheap sonic detonator packed into the base of the box. The courier was a paid contact, not an operative. He did not know what he was carrying. He was polite about it. He handed the package to the receptionist at the front desk, and Pete Donovan, who had walked into the lobby 14 seconds ahead of Tess, saw the courier's hands. He saw the way the courier's fingers, delicate, translucent Kratari fingers, would not quite let go of the package when the receptionist reached to take it. He saw the way the courier's plumage flushed pink under the collar. He saw the way the courier's translator collar had been left on transmit rather than receive. He walked forward. He said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I need that," and he took the package out of the receptionist's hands with an economy of motion that made it look like he had been asked to. He carried it, at a normal walking pace, out the side door of the lobby, across the sidewalk, and down the concrete steps to the loading dock. He set it, gently, in the center of the empty dumpster at the back of the loading bay. He walked back up the stairs. He stepped inside the door. He closed the door. He said, over his radio, "Tess, sit down." She sat down. The dumpster detonated 40 seconds later. The blast blew the loading bay doors off their hinges and dented the wall of the neighboring building. Nobody died. The Qatari courier was on the sidewalk when the detonation went off. He looked at the dumpster. He looked at his hands. He sat down on the curb and put his face in his palms and began to cry. Pete, on the floor of the lobby, half over Tess's shoulder, with 3 centimeters of glass in his forearm from the interior window, said mildly, "Ma'am, we're going to want to move." She stared at him. She was on her back on the marble floor of a compact trade office in Houston, Texas, with a human bleeding lightly onto her graphite fiber robe. She was, she realized, being covered by his body. Not because she was fragile. She was not fragile. He was covering her because his body was the thing he had that he could put between her and the window. "You are bleeding," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "On my robe." "I apologize for that, ma'am." She started to laugh. It was technically a Vakara laugh, which the translator collar rendered as a long tonal exhale and did not attempt to expand. It was the first time she had laughed since she had arrived on Earth. "Get off of me, Pete Donovan." "Yes, ma'am." He got off of her. He got her to her feet. He got her out the back of the building, into an armored transport, and to the 9th floor of the annex on Bel Air, and it was there, at 10:47 that morning, that Kaelrin Vothek would report to the sovereignty that the Veyrak conclave was not going to wait for the 10th for their attempt. They were, Kaelrin would say, arriving early. That afternoon, on the 9th floor of the annex, Brendan Lowe walked into the anteroom of Thess's suite with his hands folded in front of him and a small folded piece of paper in his left palm. He said all the correct things. He asked after her Grace's welfare. He assured her that the FBI, the State Department, and the Compact Security Office were coordinating on the courier and would trace his contact upstream by evening. He expressed, in careful diplomatic standard, his profound regret that the safety of the sovereignty had been compromised on American soil. Then he handed her the folded paper. "Your Grace," he said quietly, "I am asked by the Compact Security Office to remind you in writing that certain rotations remain scheduled for the coming week. I have marked them for your review." Thess took the folded paper. She did not open it. "Thank you, Mr. Lowe." "Your Grace." He left. Kaelrin closed the door behind him. Tess unfolded the paper. The paper contained a rotation schedule. It also contained, in a hand written along the margin in the small, precise script Brendan Lowe used for his personal notes, a single line. It read, "There is a gap in the Annex Human Security rotation at 2300 on the 8th between the change of the Vakara Close Guard and the arrival of the FBI overnight team. It is a maintenance flag gap. Not my doing. I saw it on the schedule this morning and want you to be aware." Thess looked at the note. She looked at Kaelrin. She handed him the paper. Kaelrin read it. His face did not change. "He is telling us the truth," said Kaelrin, "or he is telling us a lie so specific that it will incriminate him within 48 hours. "Yes." "Which do you think it is?" Thess looked out of her window at the twin sun-yellow corridor light on the walls of her office and thought about Brendan Lowe's shoes. "I think he's doing both," she said. "Explain." I think he's telling us the truth about the gap, and I think he's telling us the lie of omission, that the gap was not his doing. Something else is going on inside that man. He's a person under an instruction he does not want to be under. Kelrin considered this. Then we need his file. Get me his file. That is not the sovereignty's file to request. Then request it through the sovereignty. That will take 3 days. Then request it through me. Kelrin looked at her. Thesivari. Kelrin. You have the human. What? The human. Downstairs. Standing outside your door. Pete Donovan. If you would like to know why Brendan Lowe is behaving the way he is behaving, you have a man on this floor who has spent, according to his file, 11 years reading the faces of people you cannot afford to trust. Ask him. Thes did not respond immediately. To ask a member of the security personnel a diplomatic question was, in Vekara etiquette, an inversion of caste that had no clean protocol. It was the sort of thing her mother, the fourth dissensor, would have described as the vulgar convenience of the panicking. Thies opened the door. Pete was in the corridor, 3 meters from the frame, with his back against the wall, standing exactly the way she had watched him stand for 6 days. He looked up at her. She realized, with a small, precise flicker of the veil, that she had not once seen his eyes fully rested. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, there is a member of your State Department who has just delivered a note to me. I would like to describe him to you. I would like your professional impression. Pete came into the office. He listened. He looked at the note. He looked at the note for a long time. Then he looked at Thes. Ma'am, he said, somebody is holding a thing over Brendan Lowe. Something he does not want held. He was telling you about the gap because he wants you to survive the gap. He was not telling you what he is being asked to do at 2300 on the 8th because he does not know how to tell you and stay alive himself, and probably somebody else does not stay alive either. How do you know this? His hands were shaking, ma'am. His voice was not. She looked at him. How do you know it is Brendan Lowe who is being held, and not Brendan Lowe who is doing the holding? Pete considered this. He looked at the note. He looked at the handwritten margin. He looked at the way the letters had been made, the slight tremor in the descender of the G. Ma'am, he said, when a man is doing the holding, he doesn't leave you a paper trail like this. He tells you at a dinner. This note is a man setting up a witness for himself in case he cannot make the phone call later. She stood in the middle of her office in Houston, Texas, with a 2300-hour maintenance flag gap on a schedule in her hand and a human security contractor in the corner of her eye. And she felt, for the first time on this posting, that the earth was rotating under her feet in a direction she had not been briefed on. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, do you know why they attacked the Compact Trade Office this morning? Yes, ma'am, because you were signing there on the 10th. They wanted a warning shot in your city, on your calendar. They were not trying to kill you, or if they were, they weren't trying very hard. That courier was a paid contact, not a professional. Then this morning was. A dress rehearsal, ma'am. A gauge. They wanted to see who you have. They saw you. Yes, ma'am, which is why the 8th is going to be a professional. She was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, I would like you to explain something to me so that I can understand what will happen on the 8th. I would like you to explain, if you can, why human beings are difficult to kill. He looked at her. It was, she realized, the first time she had asked him a question in which the answer was assumed to have any weight. Ma'am, he said, I can do that, but we're going to need to sit down for it because it's not a short answer, and I don't like giving it standing up. She gestured to a chair. He sat down for the first time on her posting. Kelrin closed the door behind him and folded himself with an economy that reminded Pete faintly of a hunting bird. into the corner of the room to listen. "Ma'am," said Pete, "the reason we are difficult to kill is not the reason people think. People think we are tough because we are big, or because we are angry, or because we have good weapons. We are not big. Sketh are bigger. We are not angrier than a Vikara war line. Our weapons are okay. They're not miracles." Continue. "The reason we are difficult to kill is that our species evolved on a planet where the wrong end of every fight was starvation, and starvation does not care whether you are hurt. If you sit down because you are hurt, you die of the sitting down. So over about 2 million years, a certain kind of human, the kind that had ancestors who did not sit down, became the average human. And a certain kind of that human, the kind that had ancestors who kept walking after they were bleeding, became a smaller subset. You are of that subset. Ma'am, my father was a lumberman in Duluth, Minnesota. In the winter, he would take me out at 4 in the morning at -22 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a temperature Vikara probably does not experience with any comfort, and we would fell northern red oak until noon. I was 9 years old the first time. He did not stop for me. If I stopped, I froze, so I did not stop, and I want to tell you something about that. The reason I did not stop was not that I was strong. It was not that I did not feel the cold. I felt the cold every second of it. The reason I did not stop was that my father did not stop. And after enough winters, the not stopping becomes a decision you make once, and after that, it is not a decision anymore. It is a thing you know about yourself, and other people cannot argue with you about it." Thies did not move. "The Marine Corps knew what to do with people like me. They put me through an 18-month acclimation program in 1.4 standard gravity because they wanted people who could fight in orbit and in bunkers and on high G worlds. They put weight on my skeleton. They put pressure on my joints. My bone density is about 30% above baseline for my species. My tolerance for pain and for what they call threshold suppression is somewhere off the chart their doctors made. They did not tell me this. They wrote it on my file. My file is on your desk. You have read it. Yes, I am going to tell you something now, ma'am, and I want you to hear it exactly as I say it. We are not invincible. We bleed, we break, we die. All of us. Everyone. What we do is we make the other guy die faster than we do. That is the whole trick. There is no other trick. There is not a special weapon. There is not a special training. There is not a superpower. There is just a species that learned over 2 million years that if the other guy quits first, you go home. And we do not quit first. Tess sat with this for a long moment. The twin sunlight was quiet on the walls. "Mr. Donovan." "Ma'am, your species has invented a weapon that fires a small, solid object at a very high speed. This weapon is called a firearm. Vikara war doctrine has classified projectile weapons as archaic for 400 rotations." "Yes, ma'am, I know. The Sketh armor deflects energy weapons at standard settings." "Yes, ma'am. You are carrying under your coat a Beretta Compact. You are carrying at your hip a father's knife. In your vehicle downstairs, you have, according to Kelrin Vothik's inventory, a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun loaded with tungsten Foster slugs." "Yes, ma'am." "Explain to me." Pete leaned forward. He put his hands together in front of him. "Ma'am, the Sketh armor deflects energy. It does not deflect kinetic mass. A tungsten slug at 950 feet per second is a piece of very hard, very dense metal. It does not care whether the wall in front of it is a fabric or a shield or a plate. It goes through. Also, there's not a Sketh armor made that does not have joints. And joints have gaps. And gaps are the only thing that matters. If I put a tungsten slug in the gap between the helmet and the pauldron on the left side, or in the elbow assembly, or in the gap between the collar ring and the lower jaw, that Sketh is done. It does not matter what species is inside the armor. It does not matter what the armor cost. Physics does not negotiate. Physics does not negotiate. No, ma'am. Tess looked at Caelrin. Caelrin in the corner was very still. Mr. Donovan, she said. Ma'am, on the 8th, at 2300, at the maintenance flag gap, how many will they send? Ma'am, given what they've spent on the reconnaissance so far, given the caliber of the target, given the political stakes, 5. It'll be 5 sketh. Any less, and the buyer isn't taking the job seriously. Any more, and the conclave has to explain why they smuggled a small army into Houston. Can 5 sketh reach me? They will try, ma'am. Can you stop them? He looked at her for a long time. He looked at her the way a farmer looks at a cloud he can, this time, influence. Ma'am, he said, I can put 4 of them down. The 5th is the one I've been thinking about. The rest of the 6th day was spent inside the 9th floor. Pete walked the corridors. He noted every camera. He noted every door hinge, every service duct, every ceiling panel he could reach in 7 seconds or fewer. He mapped in his head the geometry of the 9th floor as a series of angles and lines of sight, and he named, in a small notebook he kept in his coat pocket, the 3 choke points between the elevator bank and Thess's suite. He labeled them Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. He labeled the plasma conduit housing in the corridor near her door with a small circle and the word maybe. He did not tell her about the plasma conduit housing. That evening, Brendan Lowe knocked on the door of the anteroom and Caelrin opened it. And Brendan Lowe held up a small paper bag from a place on McKinney Street and said, "Compliments of the Compact Trade Office. It is a whiskey. It is a good one. Please accept it with the Sovereignty's apologies for the day." "Thank you, Mr. Lowe." Brendan Lowe hesitated. He looked at Caelrin. He looked past Caelrin at Thess, who was standing at her desk, and at Pete Donovan, who was standing 3 meters behind Thess and to her left. He looked at Pete for a fraction of a second longer than the situation required. Pete looked back at him. "Your Grace," said Lowe, "I hope you sleep well tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Lowe." He left. Caelrin closed the door. He looked at the paper bag. He handed it to Pete without saying anything. Pete took the bottle out, uncapped it and smelled it. He put the cap back on. "It is not poisoned, ma'am. It's a good whiskey." "Then why did he bring it?" "Because he doesn't have anybody else to say goodbye to." The 7th day passed without incident. Pete did not sleep. Caelrin did not sleep. Thess slept for 4 hours and then did not sleep. The Vekhara Close Guard, who were 4 in number and who called themselves the Tavek, and who had, until this posting, not spoken more than diplomatic pleasantries to Pete, sat down with him at the kitchen counter at 2 in the morning of the 8th and asked him, through their leader, a compact Vekhara named Vothek Tel, to explain the plan. Pete explained the plan. Vothek Tel listened. Vothek Tel looked at the 3 other Tavek. Vothek Tel looked back at Pete. "You will be at Charlie." "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." "There will be 4 Tavek at Alpha and Bravo. There will be 1 human alone at Charlie, which is the door to Her Grace." That's the plan. Why alone? Because if they get past Alpha and Bravo, we are not going to have very much time, and I am going to need the corridor clear. "You will need it clear because I am going to have to work fast, and I don't want to shoot one of you by mistake." Vothek Tel considered this. Vothek Tel had spent 22 Vekhara years in the personal service of the 4th Dissension. Vothek Tel had killed 19 sentient beings in the course of that service. Vothek Tel had never until this week been asked to yield a corridor to a member of a species Vekhara doctrine referred to in classified documents as the tertiary uplifted. Human. Yes. If they get past Alpha and Bravo, we will already be dead. Yes. Do not fail at Charlie. I will not fail at Charlie. Vothektel put a Vikara hand on Pete Donovan's shoulder. It was the first time a Vikara warrior had touched a human being with intent since the compact was signed in the previous decade. The hand was heavier than Pete had thought. It stayed on his shoulder for 2 full seconds. Then Vothektel stood up and led the other 3 Tavek out of the kitchen. At 22:45 on the 8th of October, Brendan Lowe walked into the annex lobby with his coat over his arm and his identification badge clipped to his belt. He passed the FBI liaison desk. He passed the Vikara close guard desk. He walked through the outer security scan at the elevator bank and put his badge to the reader, and the reader chimed and the elevator doors opened and Brendan Lowe stepped inside. He rode the elevator to the 2nd floor. He stepped out. He walked at a steady pace down a service corridor to the maintenance office. He unlocked the maintenance office door with a code his position at the State Department granted him. He sat down in front of the maintenance terminal. He entered a command. The command was benign in appearance. It was a facilities work order, tagged for review, scheduled to open a service window from 2300 to 2315 on the 9th floor east elevator, during which time the human FBI overnight team would be delayed by an automated hallway checkpoint. He submitted the command. He stood up. He walked out of the maintenance office. He did not lock the door behind him. Then he sat down on the low bench outside the elevator, put his head in his hands, and waited for it to be over. At 22:52, 5 Sketh entered the lobby of the annex from a service door on the east side that a maintenance drone 3 hours earlier had, through a fault the drone did not report, failed to relock. They were in full exo armor. Their plasma carbines were on their shoulders, muzzle down, in the diplomatic safe configuration required by the compact for entrance into any signatory building. The plasma carbines were, by treaty, not to be armed until they left the lobby. The Sketh armed them in the elevator. The Vikara close guard at the elevator bank saw them. Vothektel spoke into her collar. Vothektel said, "Alpha, Bravo, they are coming." The Sketh reached the 9th floor at 22:56. The doors opened. The first Sketh took a plasma bolt in the faceplate from Tavek Nula, who was standing at Alpha, and the plasma bolt washed across the Sketh's helmet like water on stone and did not penetrate. The Sketh returned fire, and Tavek Nula was dead before her body reached the floor. Tavek Reu at Bravo opened up with a Vikara energy pulse rifle, and the pulse rifle broke against the Sketh's articulated shoulder plating. The Sketh advanced. The corridor became loud with plasma fire and the smell of ionized carbon and superheated flooring, and the specific small high sound that a Vikara honor guard makes when they know they are going to die, and they are going to die on their feet. By 22:58, the 4 Tavek at Alpha and Bravo were down. 3 were dead. Vothektel was on the floor with her back against the wall and a hand pressed against a hole in the side of her carapace, and she was speaking very quietly into her collar. She was telling Pete Donovan at Charlie that the door was open. "Charlie," she said, "they are 3. Copy, Vothektel, hold. Charlie, Vothektel is broken. Copy, Vothektel, I am at Charlie. She's behind me. Hold." The first Sketh came around the corner of the corridor at 23:01. It came fast, it came sideways, low, the way close-quarters exo armor was engineered to come at fixed defensive positions. It was expecting the 4th Tavek. It found a small, tired man in a badly-fitting suit with a Mossberg 12-gauge shotgun at his shoulder. The tungsten Foster slug went through the gap at the junction of the helmet and the left pauldron from 4 meters, and the Sketh's head snapped sideways against the interior of its own helmet, and the Sketh went down. The corridor got very quiet. The second Sketh came around the corner 60 degrees behind the first. It was expecting the first Sketh to be still standing. Pete Donovan pumped the Mossberg and put the second slug through the exposed articulation of the Sketh's right elbow assembly. and the second sketh dropped its plasma carbine and its right forearm and half of the collar plating with the arm, and staggered against the corridor wall and began to bleed a thin, colorless fluid down the paneling. Pete pumped the Mossberg. He put the third slug through the gap between the second sketh's collar ring and its lower jaw at a distance of 2 meters. The second sketh sat down against the wall and did not stand back up. The Vikara close guard, watching on the internal feed from behind Thess's door, the ones still alive, which was 3 of them, counting Vothektel by a technicality, went silent in a way that Thessivari of the Fourth Dissension, who was watching the same feed on her own terminal from her office, would describe in her deposition as the silence of a revised estimate. She had, until that moment, still been holding open the possibility that Pete Donovan was a well-trained mercenary of a particular kind. She had held that possibility as a comfort. She let it go now. She let it go completely. Then the secondary channel opened. Brendan Lowe's voice appeared on it. Brendan Lowe was 2 floors down, sitting on a low bench outside a maintenance elevator with his hands folded in his lap. "Pete," said Brendan Lowe on a channel that was not supposed to exist. "Pete, I need you to listen." Pete Donovan, standing in a corridor with 2 sketh dead and 1 wall on fire, and Vothektel breathing wrong on the floor behind him, did not lower the Mossberg. He looked at the corner. He said, "Talk fast, Brendan. They have Emma." "How long?" 6 weeks. "I'm not going to be able to stop what I have started. I need you to understand that. It is not that I did not want to." "Where is she?" "Outside Dallas. There is a facility. I have the coordinates. I am transmitting them to your unit now. There is a service road on the east side. There is a compound with a green roof. 2nd floor, northwest corner. Please, Pete." Pete looked at the corner. His unit chimed with an incoming coordinate packet. He looked at it. He recognized the location. He had seen it in an intercept brief 9 months ago at a Meridian company briefing on Conclave real estate in the southwest. And he had apparently never stopped remembering it. "Brendan," said Pete. "Yes." "You should have told me on day 1. "I know." "You should have gone to the FBI." "I know." "They would have gotten her back." "They wouldn't have, Pete. You know they wouldn't have. Not clean, not alive." Pete pumped the Mossberg. He looked at the corner. "Brendan." "Yes." "Sit still. Do not move from that bench. I am going to relay this coordinate packet to the compact emergency response line right now on a secondary of my own, and they are going to be at that facility in 40 minutes. If you get up from that bench, I will find you later, and I will remember this conversation. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Sit still, Brendan." "Yes." Pete relayed the packet. He heard the ping from Compact Response confirming receipt. He looked at his unit. He calculated that Compact Emergency Response would be at the Dallas facility in 41 minutes and that the sketh in this corridor were going to try to be past him in less than 30 seconds. He set that math aside. The 4th sketh came around the corner in a low crouch with a molecular edge blade drawn and no plasma carbine. This was the specialist. This was the one who had been sent for the door. Pete could have taken the 4th sketh with the Mossberg. He was carrying 2 slugs still in the tube. The problem was that Thess's sweet door was 3 meters behind him, and the wall around the door was drywall over an aluminum sheath, and a tungsten Foster slug at that angle would go through the door and through the aluminum sheath and through the interior wall of Thess's office, and possibly through Thess. He could not put a slug on the 4th sketh from that angle. He set the Mossberg down against the wall, unhurried, the way a man sets down a hammer he no longer needs. He drew his father's car bar from his belt. He held it in a reverse grip against his forearm, edge out. He stepped into the corridor. Everything that happened next happened in about 1 3/4 seconds. The 4th sketh came at him low, with the molecular blade coming up in a rising diagonal aimed at the seam between his lower ribs and his sternum. Pete stepped into the diagonal, which was the exact wrong direction to step, and rotated his left shoulder into the path of the blade, and the blade went into the pectoral muscle of his upper left chest, high, missing the lung by the width of a finger and passing close enough to the subclavian artery that the field medic, 38 minutes later, would say, quietly, an amount I would not recommend speculating on. The K-bar in Pete's right hand came up under the fourth Sketh's helmet and went in through the throat plate gap and came back out. The fourth Sketh's hand released the molecular blade. Pete kept the blade in his own chest and did not remove it. He drove his right shoulder into the fourth Sketh's chest and moved him laterally 3 meters into the plasma conduit housing on the corridor's east wall. The plasma conduit housing was, as Pete had noted in his notebook 2 nights before, a serviceable arc fault liability under lateral impact. It failed. The Sketh's exosystems, which were shielded against energy weapons at standard settings and not against arc faults through their own thoracic conduit, failed alongside it. The Sketh went down. The corridor went white for a fraction of a second, then dark. Emergency lighting came on. Pete Donovan was still standing. He stood with the molecular blade still in his chest and his father's K-bar in his right hand and blood on the front of his shirt. And he looked at the corner where the fifth Sketh had not yet come around. The fifth Sketh came around at 23:03 and a half. The fifth Sketh was the unit commander. The fifth Sketh had been listening to the corridor on its unit's shared channel. The fifth Sketh had heard 4 unit members die. It had heard the specialist go silent mid-strike. It had heard the plasma conduit failure. It came around the corner low and fast, plasma carbine at the shoulder, and it stopped 1.5 meters into the corridor. It looked at the corridor. It saw the first Sketh face down. It saw the second Sketh against the wall. It saw the specialist against a broken conduit housing that was still sparking gently. It saw the small human standing in the middle of the corridor with a knife in his right hand and a blade of blue light coming out through his back, and it saw that the small human was breathing and looking at the fifth Sketh with a face that was not tired or angry or afraid, but only performing an inventory. The fifth Sketh, in its own language, which the compact would later transcribe from the recovered helmet recorder, said, "This is not the operation we contracted." The fifth Sketh took 2 steps backward. It turned. It ran. It made it out through the east service door and to the second van and to the highway, and it was intercepted by compact response on the highway to Galveston 90 minutes later. It surrendered without a shot. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, the fire suppression system engaged and began, with a small, polite mechanical hiss, to put out the fires that the plasma bolts had started in the paneling. Vothek Tell, on the floor at Bravo, was still breathing. Tess opened the door of her suite. She stepped out into the corridor. She looked at Pete. Pete looked at her. He was still holding the K-bar in his right hand. The molecular blade was still through him. His shirt was black on the left side. "Ma'am, Mr. Donovan, compact response is at the Dallas facility in about, 29 minutes. The daughter should be alive when they get there. I sent the packet on a secondary." "Mr. Donovan, ma'am, please sit down." "I will, ma'am, in a minute. I want to make sure the corridor is clear." She looked at him. "The corridor," said Thesivari of the fourth dissension, "is clear." He looked around mildly, as if double-checking her assessment. He nodded once. He sat down against the wall. He did not remove the blade. He looked up at her. "Ma'am." "Yes. I would like a real coffee. From the place on Bel Air, 2 blocks east. It opens at 6, not synthesized. Not the grain compound. The actual coffee. I have been thinking about it for 4 days." She looked at him for a very long time. She turned to Kaelrin, who had come out of the office behind her and was standing very still with a slate in his hand and an expression Kaelrin had never worn in Thess's presence, which was the expression of a man watching a religious event that he did not personally believe in and could not personally deny. Thesivari of the fourth dissension said, in unfiltered Vekara, without waiting for the collar, Ketheluva toshin kareth, vothek imahun, find him the coffee. The collar, for the first time in 8 days, translated her clean. The medics came up the corridor at 2309. 2 of them were compact human, and 1 of them was a Vikara field surgeon named Iselrikesh. And Iselrikesh crouched next to Pete and looked at the blade in his chest, and then at Pete's face, and then at the blade in his chest again. And Iselrikesh said, in a Vikara accented standard, "Human, we are going to take the blade out. It is going to hurt significantly." "Yes, ma'am. You will not lose consciousness." "I would prefer not to, ma'am." "You should. Losing consciousness is a healthy response of the human body to what I'm about to do." "I hear you, ma'am. I would still prefer not to." Iselrikesh looked at Thes. Thes did not intervene. Iselrikesh looked back at Pete. Iselrikesh took the blade out. Pete Donovan did not lose consciousness. He grunted. He put his teeth together. He held the wall behind him with his right hand. The blade came out slow and clean, a hand span of blue, quiet light. And Iselrikesh's assistant packed the wound with a compression foam that hissed as it entered and expanded. Iselrikesh cauterized the subclavian gash with a small emitter that smelled mildly of burned copper. "Human." "Yes, ma'am. You should have lost consciousness." "I know, ma'am. I've been told before." She looked at him. She said quietly, "Anomalous threshold suppression." "Yes, ma'am. Your species is going to be studied." "Yes, ma'am. That's the general expectation." She stood up. She walked away down the corridor toward Vothek Tel, who was still incredibly breathing. Brendan Lowe was in compact custody at 2311, having sat as instructed on the low bench outside the maintenance elevator on the 2nd floor for the entire duration of the corridor engagement. When the compact response team reached him, he stood up. He handed his badge to the team lead. He put his hands behind his back. He did not resist. At 2357, the Compact Emergency Response Strike Team, which had staged out of Fort Hood, reached the conclave facility outside Dallas. There were 19 paramilitary personnel on site. There was a small girl, 7 years old, on the 2nd floor in the northwest corner room, sitting on a folding chair with her ankles tied to the legs of the chair and her hands folded in her lap. Her name was Emma Lowe. She had brown hair. She was scared. She had a book. When the strike team entered the room, she looked up. She said, "Are you here from my dad?" The team lead, a captain named Marissa Hollis, sat down on the floor next to the folding chair so that her eyes were below the child's eyes. "Yes, honey. Is my dad okay?" Captain Hollis had been briefed on the disposition of Brendan Lowe. Captain Hollis had also been briefed at the beginning of her career on how to answer the questions of children in facilities like this one. "Your dad is okay," said Captain Hollis. "He asked us to come and get you. Do you want to come home?" "Yes." "Okay, honey. Let's go." Pete Donovan spent the next 3 days in a medical suite on the 5th floor of the annex, under the general management of Iselrikesh, who did not permit him to stand up until she was satisfied that his subclavian repair had held, and who, when asked by Kelrin Vothek on the morning of the 3rd day whether the human was going to make a complete recovery, answered without looking up from her chart that the human was going to make what she had learned to call a human recovery, which was a category she had, until this week, considered a euphemism. Thesivari of the 4th dissension visited him on the morning of the 4th day. She came into the medical suite and stood at the foot of his bed. She was in a formal robe of graphite fiber and copper thread trim because the signing had gone forward on the 10th, as scheduled, in a small ceremony that had lasted 11 minutes and had rendered the Veyrac Conclave's jump gate routing rights null across 122 star systems. She had signed the compact with Pete Donovan's blood still on the marble floor of a corridor 2 floors above, because Aysel Rikesh had refused, on medical grounds, to permit anyone to mop it before the compact was signed. Tess looked at Pete. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, I am going to ask you a question. I would like you to answer honestly. Yes, ma'am. Why did you do it? He thought about this. He was tired. His shoulder ached. He was very much awake. Ma'am, he said, the job was to keep you breathing. I would rather you did not die on my watch. That is the whole answer. I do not have a more architectural version available right now. She looked at him. The nictitating veil closed once, slowly. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, you could have died in that corridor. Yes, ma'am. You did not know for certain that you would not. No, ma'am. Explain to me, please. What is in your species that permits you to walk into that corridor? He looked at the ceiling of the medical suite for a while. Ma'am, my father died when I was 22. He was cutting timber on the north ridge of Cook County in Minnesota. He miscalculated a fall. The tree came down on him at an angle he had not planned for. He was found the next morning. When they found him, he had crawled 98 yards down the ridge, with the tree still on his lower body, toward the truck. He did not make it to the truck. He got 98 yards. Ma'am, I have thought about that a lot over the years. The reason my father crawled 98 yards down a ridge with a tree on him was not that he thought he was going to make it. He knew he was not going to make it. The reason he crawled was that at every yard he asked himself if he could do one more. And the answer, every time, until the 98th yard, was yes. On the 98th yard, the answer was no. So he stopped. And that was the whole thing. Tess did not move. Ma'am, when I stepped into the corridor, I asked myself if I could do one more thing. The answer was yes, so I did it. And then the answer was yes again. So I did it again. That is the whole of it. There is nothing else in there. Nothing else. No, ma'am. Not honor. Not the way you mean honor, ma'am. Not glory. No, ma'am. Not affection for me. He hesitated. He looked at her. He almost smiled. He did not. Ma'am, on day 2 you spat on me in the elevator. I do not carry affection into my second week that easily. She started to laugh. It was, again, the tonal Vicara exhale that the translator collar did not attempt to expand. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am, I would like to hire you permanently. The sovereignty has an escort service. You would report to me. Your compensation would be, in compact terms, extremely favorable. Your family in Minnesota would never worry about a payment again. My mother, the 4th Descensor, has approved the offer. He looked at her. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at her again. Ma'am, that is a very generous offer. But I do not lift heavy objects on request. I do not attend court functions. I do not sit for portraits. I would need 3 weeks a year in Duluth. I would need to be able to eat what I want to eat, when I want to eat it. And, ma'am, one very specific thing. Name it. I do not wash windows. The nictitating veil closed once. Mr. Donovan. Yes, ma'am. You have my word. You will not wash windows. Then, ma'am, yes. She reached forward very carefully and put a Vicara hand on the human's uninjured shoulder. She held it there for 2 seconds. Then she stood up straight and she turned and she walked out of the medical suite. At the door, she stopped. She spoke without turning around. Mr. Donovan. Ma'am. There is a coffee waiting for you in the anteroom of my suite. From the place on Bel Air, 2 blocks east. It is a real one. Rikesh has permitted it, over her professional objection. Thank you, ma'am. You are welcome. She left. Pete Donovan lay in the medical bed for a while and looked at the ceiling. He thought about his sister Gail in Duluth and the loader payment on the sawmill and his father on the North Ridge of Cook County and the 98 yards. He thought about a small girl in a folding chair in Dallas who had asked whether her dad was okay. He thought about Brendan Lowe and the note in the margin of the rotation schedule and the small tremor in the descender of the G. He thought about a corridor on the 9th floor and a blade of quiet blue light coming out through his back. He thought about the coffee. He got up. Rikesh, when he passed her in the corridor with one arm in a compression sling and the other reaching for the anteroom door, said something very quiet in Vekara that the collar did not translate. He nodded to her politely. He went to get the coffee. 6 months later, in a compact hearing room on a station called Meridian Anchor at the outer boundary of the treaty zone, Thesivari of the 4th Dissension stood up, without having been asked to stand, and requested the floor to give a voluntary deposition in the matter of the events of the 8th of October at the Diplomatic Annex on Bel Air in Houston, Texas, United States. She began by describing the look on the human's face when the molecular blade came out through his chest. She did not describe pain. She did not describe fear. She described a small, tired man in a badly fitting suit, standing in a corridor with a knife in his right hand and blue light coming out through his back, looking at the corner where the 5th Sketh had not yet come around, and performing an inventory. She said that she had, until the moment of that inventory, believed that she understood the shape of the universe. She said that she had, in the moment of that inventory, revised her belief. She said that she had, in the years since, been unable to unrevise it and would not if she could. She said, in closing, that if the Compact wished to understand what it meant to have humans as signatories, the Compact should watch its humans not in ceremonial functions, and not in trade discussions, and not in war, which was rare, but in the small, unglamorous corridors where a human was asked to do one more thing and answered yes. She said the Compact should watch a human at the 97th yard. She said that she had ordered him a coffee that morning when the corridor was still on fire and Vothektel was still bleeding on the floor because she had not, in that moment, known how to say what she had wanted to say to him, and coffee had been the closest terrestrial equivalent to the sentence she was looking for. She sat down. That evening, on the observation deck of Meridian Anchor, Pete Donovan, in a sovereignty escort uniform that his sister Gail had taken one look at in a photograph and pronounced, "The funniest thing I have ever seen a Donovan wear," stood next to Thesivari of the 4th Dissension and looked out at the slow curve of the treaty zone. He had a paper cup in his hand. It contained a coffee that Rikesh had smuggled from a place on Bel Air, 2 blocks east of the annex on Bel Air, because the coffee was not technically a coffee that existed on the station. "Mr. Donovan." "Ma'am." "You are quiet tonight." "Yes, ma'am." "Anything in particular?" "Ma'am, my sister called this afternoon. She is coming to visit next month. She would like to know if she can bring the dog." Thesivari of the 4th Dissension, 3rd heir to the Vekara sovereignty, whose true name was a cascade of ultrasonic clicks over a subsonic pulse, looked out at the treaty zone for a long moment, and then she turned her head and she looked at the human next to her. "Mr. Donovan." "Ma'am." "She can bring the dog." He nodded. He took a drink of his coffee. He said mildly, "Thank you, ma'am." She looked back out at the treaty zone. She was still smiling in the Vekara way, which was not a smile at all, but was, if you had been trained to see it, the same thing. What a journey! The real strength in this whole story was never the size of the fist or the speed of the trigger. It was a man who kept asking himself if he could do one more thing and answered yes, one more yard at a time. until an alien princess who had spat on his face learned to translate his silence better than his own words. If this story moved you the way it moved us to write it, hit that like button. It is honestly the thing that keeps stories like this one on the air. Share it with the friend who loves human against the impossible science fiction, the one who quietly cheers for the small, tired guy in the badly fitting suit. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the next long-form HFY epic we drop. Now here is the question we want you to answer in the comments, and be honest with us. Would you have accepted Thess's offer to escort her for the rest of your career and never see a hard winter in Duluth again? Or would you have taken the medal and the pension and gone home to your sister and the dog? There is no wrong answer, only the one you can live with. Tell us below. Keep looking at the stars. And keep an eye on the quiet ones in the corner of the room. You never know which of them just decided they can do one more yard.